Welcome back to the Tactics with Trav YouTube channel, guys. So in this one, we're playing white, and black just moved queen to c2. So let's do material count first before we dive deep into this. So I have 3 pawns, black has 4 pawns. I have a knight and 2 rooks and a queen, and black has a knight, 2 rooks and a queen. So material-wise, we're down a point, but let's dive deep into this now. So with queen to c2, black is just getting more into our backfield, but it's also attacking our queen, trying to trade off. So if our queen were to take on c2, then black's knight would take on c2. And just for the fun of it, let's see what happens if we were to just push d7, because our pawn on d6 is so far advanced. I almost want to just push it, just see what happens. d7, black's rook could get behind it with rook to d6, so I think we would lose it. So we need to be a lot more tactical than just doing the obvious. So let's see what else we can muster here. So with queen to c2, I like to play the what if game. So what if we do this or do that, and then just see where it takes us. Then we can trial and error this until we get it correct. So black's rook on a8 is hanging. So we could just take it. So let's imagine we take queen takes a8. What's the downfall of that? Queen takes a8 would be a blunder, because then black could just take queen takes f2, and that's checkmate, because the queen's supported by the rook back on f6. So that's the reason we can't just take the rook right away. But let's see if there's a way to juggle that, where like we can somehow defend f2, but then we can still take the rook on a8. What if there's something to that effect here? Like, part of me wants to look at rook to h7 check as a way to deflect the king away from g7, and then maybe we can juggle something like queen h4 check. So let's do that. Rook h7 check, king takes h7, queen h4 check, king goes back to g7, let's say. And do we really accomplish anything with that? I don't think so. I don't think that does anything. So we don't want to take the hanging rook. We don't want to go rook h7. If we take the queen, let's go back to that for a second. Queen takes c2, knight takes c2. We tried pushing the pawn, but what if we take the pawn? So queen takes c2, knight takes c2, d6 takes e7. So we want a pawn back, but then we're probably going to lose it again, because black could just go rook to f7 or rook to e8 maybe. I'd probably use the rook on f6 to go to f7, just to keep that open, just to keep the file, the a file, if I was playing black. So I probably wouldn't go rook e8. So let's imagine we do that line. Queen takes c2, knight takes c2, d6 takes e7, rook f7. Because the knight had to take back on c2, it does give up defense over d5. So maybe we go knight d5. There's enough there. Well, I mean, we do defend our pawn. We do defend our pawn at e7. So knight going d5 isn't pointless. I mean, it does protect the pawn on e7 now. So that becomes a real thorn in black's position. I wouldn't say that's any sort of fancy tactic, but it does look like it has some promise based on what it's doing. You know, protecting the pawn on e7. We're threatening to advance e8, promoting our pawn. And now, now black's defense are going to be tied down to defending the pawn, defending against our pawn queening, because now that knight is out of position when it took on c2. Yeah, I mean, that's not bad. Let's look for more, though. let's not settle for that. I mean, that's decent. Like what we're looking at is queen takes c2, knight takes c2, d6 takes e7, and then if rook f7, then we have knight d5 protecting the pawn. But that's not really. I mean, that's I think a decent sequence. But let's look for more. And in that case, we would have got our pawn back. One thing that I'm looking at right now is what if rook takes on g6 check, and then rook takes g6, right? So we took the g6 pawn, and then the rook takes back on g6, and then we take the rook on a8, because we're deflecting the supporting cast from f2. So remember, we couldn't take the rook on a8 because the queen taking on f2 is checkmate, supported by the rook on f6. But what if we deflected that rook? So that's what I'm looking at. Rook takes g6, check, rook takes g6, queen takes a8, and now queen takes f2 doesn't work because it's not supported. So just wondering. And queen can't go to d1 for a checkmate in that because our knight actually defends d1. So what if the queen went to like c1 though? Queen c1 check. I think that could present some real problems. I don't think that's good because queen c1, and then if we go queen, we can't go to the g file because that rook would now be cutting off the king on the g file. So then we go king e2, and we would lose our rook on h1. So then we would get skewered. We'd walk right into a skewer by doing that. So just look at that sequence real quick. Rook takes g6 check, rook takes g6, queen takes a8, queen c1 check, and then we got to go king e2, and then queen takes h1. So I don't think that well, no, hold on a second. Our queen on a8 defends our rook on h1. We can't overlook that. So our rook on h1 is defended. Okay, so let's entertain that for a little longer. So after queen c1 check, king e2, let's say the queen goes back to c2 check. That doesn't feel right though. Feels like we're just gonna get checkmated here. Maybe king goes to e3. Then he's got queen to d3 check. And that's checkmate. Wow, interesting line, guys. Check that out. So rook takes g6 check. Rook takes g6. Queen takes a8. Queen c1 check. King e2. Queen doesn't take on h1 because it is protected by our queen back on a8. So it goes to c2 and checks us again. And then we got to go, if we go e3, then queen to d3 is checkmate. Because we can't even escape to f4 because the e5 pawn cuts that off. So just interesting line. So then instead of e3, we go back to e1, and then it could be a forced perpetual. It could just go queen c1 check, king e2, queen c2 check, king e1. But I mean, we don't want to fight for a draw here. We want to win the game. So let's give up on rook g6, rook takes g6, unless there's something else that I'm missing. So let's just give that one more shot. Rook takes g6 check, rook takes g6. Yeah, I don't see any point in sacking on g6 unless we're going to take that rook, and then we don't want to take that rook because of that line we just went through. So let's look at doing this. Let's look at I was looking at queen takes e5, but we don't want to do that because you still have queen takes f2 checkmate. So Well, okay, hold on for a second. Let's go rook takes g6, check. Rook takes g6, queen takes e5, check. And see if that does anything. That looks like it could be promising. Rook takes g6, check. Rook takes g6, queen takes e5, check. And if king to f7, then we have queen takes e7, check. And this is going to get really bad for black here. Because our queen's supported by our pawn, and that king looks like it's about ready to get mated. So then if that happens, king would have to go back to, say, g8. And then we have queen to h7 check. King f8. King h8 check. King f7. Now our queen's on free from the rook on a8, but we have rook to h7 check. King e6. And then we could take the rook on a8. There's a lot there. There's a lot that could happen there. So let's look at this deflection. This is really interesting. There's rook takes g6 move. There's a lot there after we get off taking the rook line on a8, but we actually take the pawn at e5. Rook takes g6 check. Rook takes g6. Queen takes e5 check. King f7. Then we're looking at queen takes e7 check. King to g8. Queen to h7 check. King f8. Still don't force a checkmate. You just kind of chase him around, and then we end up taking the rook on a8. I don't know if this is forcing enough to justify that sacrifice, guys, on g6. Way to keep playing around with it. And then we've only contemplated him going to f7. We haven't even looked at other options. So what I mean is after rook takes g6, rook takes g6, queen takes e5 check, we were just assuming he goes f7, but what if he just goes back to g8 immediately? Well, that would be bad because then we have rook to h8 check. Rook to h8 check. Then he goes f7, and then he gets mated because queen takes e7 would be mate because we cut off the 8th rank after rook h8. Okay, so going g8 is the worst for him in that sequence. But what else can he do? Rook takes g6, rook takes g6, queen takes e5, check. Okay, so we know why he doesn't want to go to g8 because he gets mated in 2 moves after that. But if he goes f7, that seems to be putting up the best fight. That seems to put up the best fight. Oh, I think, okay, we just need to play the sequence a little bit. So I think that rook that's on h1 needs to go to h7 instead of taking on e7 right away. That might be the difference. And that way we can get a rook in there to help support the queen for the checkmate. So starting from the top, rook takes g6, check, rook takes g6, queen takes e5 check. And if king to f7, then we have rook to h7 check. So that looks pretty good. Because then if the king goes to f8 or g8, like let's say he goes to g8, then we have the queen would go to h8 for checkmate. But if it goes to f8, then we have queen takes e7 check. And then the king goes to g8, and then we have queen to f7 checkmate. Okay, I think we might have figured it out, guys. So it's a little bit tough because I didn't initially see that rook sacrifice right away with rook takes g6. It's just not the first thing that pops out to me. But it's clever because it deflects the rook away from the diagonal, the a1 to h8 diagonal, which we need to check black's king with queen takes e5 check. And then after that, the king goes to f7, because if he goes to g8, we have rook h8 check. And that we know that line. So let's count this out real quick. Rook takes g6 check. That's 1. Rook takes g6. That's also 1. My move, your move. That's 1. Now queen takes e5 check. That's 2. King goes to g8. That's 2. And then we have rook to h8 check in that sequence, which would be 3. And then if king to f7, that's 3. Then we have queen takes e7 checkmate, and that's 4. So it's a 4-move checkmate if the king were to drop to g8. So that's just one branch, guys. So now we got to do the next branch to keep these things properly sequenced in our heads for over the board games. So now let's start from the top. We got one branch. Now let's go rook takes g6 check. Rook takes g6. That's 1. Queen takes e5. That's 2. King to f7. That's 2. Rook to h7 check. That's 3. And then let's say in that line, king goes to g8. Just drops back. That's 3. And then we have queen to h8 checkmate, and that's 4. So that's a 4-move checkmate in that line. So that's our second line. Now let's start from the top again, because now we got to calculate a couple other branches. Let's go rook takes g6 check. 1. Rook takes g6. Queen takes e5 check. That's 2. King to f7. Rook to h7 check. That's 3. King goes to f8, let's say, instead of g8. That's 3. Then we have queen takes e7 check. That's 4. And king to g8. That's 4. And then our fifth move would be queen to f7 checkmate. That's 5. That's a 5-move checkmate. That's our third line. So let's see if we've missed anything else. So let's say rook takes g6. Start from the top. Rook takes g6 check. Rook takes g6. Queen takes e5 check. Let's say the rook just blocks. That's something that they could do. The rook just comes back to f6 and blocks our queen. So that's 1, 1, 2, 2. We're on move 2. Now the third move in this could be queen takes e7 check. That's 3. And if in that case, on the third move, rook takes g6, rook takes g6, queen takes e5, rook back to f6. Queen takes e7. The rook could just go back to f7 and block again. Let's say he does that. Rook blocks to f7. Then let's take our h1 rook and then go to g1 check. That'd be our fourth move. Rook to g1 check. Now what? Well, that's pretty bad because then if the king steps away, then we take that rook on f7. Yeah, this is pretty bad for him, guys. Like, I think that's the best defense, though. So that's why I still don't want to make the move yet, and I want to calculate this because that does seem to be the best defense for black. It's just a block with his rook that took back on g6 and just go back to f6. But I'm trying to figure out whether taking on e7 is the best follow-up, or if it's rook to g1 check. It might be rook to g1 check. So let's start from the top on this. I know this has been a very tedious problem, guys, but this is going to really help with your calculation skills in addition to the tactic. So that's kind of what we're striving for here, is to improve our tactics and our calculation by doing these puzzles. And I don't really care how long it takes, because that way you can get into a game and see these right away. The difference is going to be improving our efficiency and making sure we get it fast. So obviously this one's taking some time, but it's going to help us in the accuracy department. So rook takes g6 check, rook takes g6, queen takes e5 check, rook to f6. And we're looking at rook to g1 check. And that way, if king f7, then we have queen takes e7 check, and it's going to be game over. But let's say after rook g1 check, he actually has this move. He can bring his queen. His queen could come all the way back to g6. But I think we're fine there, because then if we're just either going to take the queen or we're going to take on e7 check with an in-between move, Zuiz and Zug, and then take the queen. So I think I'm not so concerned about queen to g6, but I am trying to figure out whether taking an e7 check right away is the best, or if it's rook to g1. So let's rook g6 check, queen, rook takes g6, queen takes e5 check, rook back to f6, rook g1 check. And now that rook is pinned, so it's not going to come back to g6. So we've looked at queen coming back to g6. We're not super concerned about that. And if king goes to f7, he's going to get mated a couple moves later with queen takes e7 check, and then we're going to mate him the next move. So in this line, after rook g1 check, king goes. Oh, wow. This is cool. So now let's say the king were to go to h7 on this line, or h6, then we'd have queen dropping back to h1, and that would be checkmate. So it would turn the other way and turn it into a ladder mate. That's pretty cool. So let's count that line out. This would be like branch 4. Rook takes g6 check, rook takes g6, queen takes e5, that's 2. Rook back to f6, that's 2. Rook to g1, that's 3. And if king goes to h6 or h7 or h8, then we have queen to h2. I said h1 earlier. I was incorrect. It's h2, and that would be checkmate. Technically not mate yet, because the rook could come to h6, and then we just take it. Queen takes h6. But they're going to lose so much material, it's not going to be worth it. So let's just go ahead and make the move now, guys. I think that's it. I feel pretty good about this line. So let's just go ahead and take that pawn on g6 and see what it says. So rook takes g6 is what we're going to go with. We'll see what Lichess says. Yep, that's correct. Okay, so the rook does take back here. And now we're looking at queen takes e5 for all the reasons we talked about. Okay, that's correct. Oh, and the rook did go back to f6, guys. So that, we figured this out after like 18 minutes. Is the rook coming back as the best defense? So we looked at rook to g1 check being our best line. Because if after rook g1 check, king f7, queen takes e7 check, that would be checkmate. So we know that that is how it's going to go. If the king goes f7, if rook g1 check, king could go to h6, h7, or h8, but then in that case, we're going to go queen to h2 check, and it would just turn into a ladder mate. So just want to triple check this, because if queen takes e7 is faster, I want to make sure that we play queen e7 and not rook g1. Queen e7 check, queen takes e7 check, technically. I don't think that's as forcing, guys, because then he has rook to f7, which is not as forcing. And then we have all sorts of issues like his queen could come back to g6 and just block. So if you're looking at queen takes e7 check, rook f7, queen to g5 check could be blocked by queen to g6. His queen can come back to g6. So I kind of want to just go rook g1 like we calculated, and then just go that way, because we have the ladder mate this way, and then we have the other checkmate line if he goes king f7. And his rook's pinned. So after rook g1 check, his rook can't go to g6 because it's pinned. So let's go rook g1. That's what we've been working on. Oh, that's wrong. Shoot. All this time we got it wrong. So lost 23 points, but this is all learning. So let's see what the move is. Well, we looked at queen takes e7, so let's look at that. Let's see if that's correct. Yep, that's correct. Okay, so queen takes e7 was the move, but I did get this problem wrong. So king goes to g8, and then and then rook g1. So the rook would have been here because we hadn't moved it yet. So then it's going to be here. Because after king to h8, then we have queen takes f6. Then it takes the back on the rook. That's what we missed. That's what I missed. All right, so we're just going to make the move now. Nope, saying this is incorrect too. Well, why would it not be rook g1? Because rook can just block on g6. Rook g1 checks met with rook g6. So we just take the rook, I guess. Take the rook. It's a tough one, guys. It's still going too. So now the rook comes down to a1 check. So you got to calculate all this. I mean, this is deep. This is pretty deep. King g2. King g2, and then problem's over. king g2, and then rook takes h1, because if not, then rook to h8 checkmate. I don't know why this problem's still going. Okay, so that would be the end of the problem. But I mean, guys, you know how we do tactics. We try to calculate A to Z, and we did go really far, but if this were the alphabet, I messed up on part X in the alphabet A to Z. It's just, we do this for calculation training, but I'm still posting this even though I missed the problem, just because it's part of the training. So you're not always gonna get every problem right, and it's all part of the process. So our calculation was pretty solid up until the point where I messed up at the end, but you live and learn, and on to the next puzzle.